Hello and welcome to a special edition of WMAR-2 News. I'm Jamie Costello. Imagine pulling into the Ponca Bird with something like this. You know, here in Baltimore, nobody built cars better than General Motors. In fact, it was GM, it was Beth Steel, it was National Brewing Company, Park Sausages that raised our city. But before General Motors leaves us for good, they are leaving behind a ton of memories. We're going to go down memory lane right now. Let's start where it all started on Broning Highway. Here's Christian Schaefer.
For 70 years, that massive complex of GM plants stood right here at Broning Highway in Holabird in southeast Baltimore. And in that time, it supplied all kinds of vehicles to General Motors, including those Astro and Safari minivans right there at the end. But over those 7 decades, the plant also supplied thousands of Baltimore families with a great life.
And their 1940 Chevrolet will get them to their destination easily, safely, and with the utmost economy.
Like these old GM commercials,
all of this sort of makes you wonder what those masterminds are going to think of next, doesn't it?
and like most of the vehicles it produced, the Broning Highway General Motors plant, which everybody just called Baltimore Assembly, exists now only in grainy old videos.
Supervisors review the quality performance of their area and chart the trend at their quality gate stations.
Jim Smedley worked at Baltimore Assembly for 42 years. It was only 34 years for Skip Shiftlett.
It was very, very demanding, very challenging, but also very rewarding.
It was a very dedicated workforce, and that's what made it so successful in Baltimore. The hourly workforce and the salary workforce were very dedicated people, and we worked very hard, and they took care of us.
At its peak, more than 7,000 people worked at Baltimore Assembly.
We had an assembly line set up for the passenger cars and for the truck lines. And at one time during the height of our plant, we worked both shifts on both lines.
In all of those decades at the plant, Jim and Skip saw highs and lows, but all these years later, they mostly remember the highs.
That was never an obstacle too much. Whatever the corporation wanted us to build, we gladly accepted it, and we were building many, many product lines. We built Chevys, we built Oldsmobiles, we built Pontiacs, we built Buicks. I think we built everything but Cadillacs. The same thing with the trucks. We had a truck line, and we built small trucks. We built large trucks, we built school buses.
And there were changes, always tons of changes.
We had periods during the summer where we changed over, model change, and we were down for 3 weeks, and we were running maintenance crews and supervision around the clock to get all the work that had to be done to convert from the previous model to the new model coming on.
But by the early 1980s, there was already talk that it all might be coming to an end.
In '81, we were on the list of one of the plants they were considering to shut down, and I believe we were fourth from the bottom. The other 3 plants all got closed down, and we were next.
Instead, Baltimore Assembly got a reprieve from something new, from next on the chopping block to the sole producer of GM's new so-called M van.
We were able to put in a successful bid, if you will, for the M van. We were selected to be the plant to build the M van.
It was an innovation that would eventually come to be known as the minivan. Again, a lot of work, 2.5 years of preparation, but then Chevy Astros and GMC Safari minivans started rolling off the old assembly line. Baltimore Assembly was back.
To watch that minivan go along the assembly line and to watch the first minivan roll off the end of the line was so pleasing that it's a very good feeling to bring these projects to finalization and be successful.
The plant once again living up to its reputation as the plant willing to take on any challenge.
We were the only one that built the M van, so every M van you saw on the road, either the Astro with the Chevrolet Astro or the GMC Safari, when you see an Astro or Safari, you know it was built in Baltimore.
Still, even with that renewed success, larger forces were at work. In 1981, GM opened its first assembly plant in Mexico, and in the 1980s, the United States was overtaken by Japan as the largest producer of automobiles in the world. The U.S. would eventually pass Japan again in the 1990s, only to be overtaken again in the 2000s by China. Forces that strong hands and experienced workers were powerless to hold back.
As time passed and as eras passed and as the post-industrial revolution took hold, you could see the slow denigration of these communities, and that really took off in the 70s and 80s.
Bob Ehrlich would eventually become Maryland's 60th governor. In 1994, he was elected to Congress, representing Maryland's 2nd District, which includes the eastern part of Baltimore County, where many GM workers live.
The place was running, and they were hiring, and it was 2 shifts, and it was good middle-class jobs, by the way. Folks went there as 18-year-olds, and they retired as 55-year-olds or 60-year-olds, and they had condos in Ocean City. I mean, this was a blue-collar America.
But those larger forces were putting a strain on manufacturing all over the United States, including Browning Highway in southeast Baltimore.
You could see the demand curve go down, and as that occurred, layoffs. Well, first of all, 1 shift, and then layoffs, and then closure, sort of a death spiral.
In places like Washington and Detroit, the politicians were trying to convince General Motors to stay in Baltimore, but in Baltimore, Skip and Jim didn't need a politician to know which way the wind was blowing at their plant, which used to produce more than 80 cars and trucks every hour.
In the late 90s, early 2000s, we're down to 1 shift operation. We've got this massive facility, 3 million square feet. We're located on 187 acres, and we're producing 1 shift of like 40 M-vans. It's very difficult because of the overhead you have and your fixed costs to turn a profit.
In the early 2000s, another hit from Washington, a tightening of regulations on crash safety and emissions. GM's minivans would not be able to meet the new standard without costly modifications. The final day of production at Baltimore Assembly, May 13th, 2005, Friday the 13th.
It was sad, but we knew it was kind of inevitable. We had fought the good fight.
Yeah, more than 3.2 million of those Safari and Astro minivans produced right here. After the plant shut down, the buildings were knocked down. The site is now a massive distribution center for the online retailer Amazon. Reporting from Southeast Baltimore, Christian Schaefer. Jamie, now back to you.
1969 gas was selling at 35 cents a gallon. Let's top it off here so we can get out to the Allison transmission plant out there in White Marsh when we come right back.
This is where not just the Maryland economy, but the American economy is going. More light industrial, more higher technology, less blue-collar, heavy labor jobs, less union jobs.
Brilliant brains came up with this invention to run our cars, and GM kept running in Baltimore 13 years after closing its Holabird plant. Mark Roper tells us it's because new technology and training that made it all possible.
General Motors' presence in our area didn't end on Browning Highway. It continued on Philadelphia Road. We're taking a look back to the year 2000 when the White Marsh plant opened right here in Baltimore County. It was the beginning of a new century, and the new millennium brought renewed excitement and hope for the future for auto workers. And it's where the next chapter in GM's Maryland story begins, as history was about to be made.
Welcome. This is our 1000 series transmission.
As well as the Allison transmission. The state-of-the-art General Motors Baltimore operations became the home of the powerful yet reliable A1000. Its reputation was solid.
This is Duramax Diesel. This is Allison Transmission. We're the powertrain in the Silverado Heavy Duty.
It was one of the most exciting things that when I look back at my career as county executive that we did and we worked on.
Former Baltimore County executive, now Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger, reveals how the White Marsh plant also became the first for an American car maker to build electric motors in the U.S.
I got a call from David Iannucci, who at that time was the head of economic development for the governor, Governor Glendenning at the time. And he said, we're competing with other jurisdictions like Mexico and the South, but General Motors is looking to maybe build a new robotic plant in White Marsh. And I said, great, let's get together. And we put together a plan on how we were going to try to persuade General Motors to come to Baltimore.
Millions of dollars in incentives from Washington, the state of Maryland, and Baltimore County were enough to entice GM to settle on building in White Marsh. And to sweeten the deal even further, Congressman Ruppersberger enlisted the help of several local community colleges to retrain workers from the Browning Highway plant. As far as the congressman was concerned, things were great until they weren't.
And then all of a sudden, we get a phone call from the president of General Motors. Uh-oh, what's this about? And she wanted to meet with us. So she met with us and our two senators, Cardin and Van Hollen, and then Elijah Cummings and John Sarbanes and myself. And she told us that they were going to close the plant.
The community, which beat out other parts of the U.S. and Mexico 20 years prior to successfully secure GM's Baltimore operations, now sees its jobs headed south.
This country put in over $50 billion to save General Motors when the country almost went into a depression. And then just locally, we put in federal, state, and local over $100 million, and you're saying you're going to leave us and the best employees that you have in the country? We can't understand this. It makes no sense.
Somebody in the government needs to stop this.
A sentiment felt by at least one man who purchased a Chevy and loves his Chevy, but says it may be his last.
Why they're closing this plant and sending our stuff to Mexico is crazy. People got to realize I'm a Vietnam vet from 1968 in the Marines. This country is ours. It should be built here. If they're going to build Chevrolets, then nobody should ever buy another Chevrolet there is.
Maryland and Baltimore County leaders fought to keep GM's Baltimore operations local, but by November 2018, the decision had been made. Baltimore County Executive John Olszewski Jr. recalls how those conversations went.
We met directly with the members of the plant very early on to affirm that we were committed to them and doing all that we could to keep it open. We think ultimately and unfortunately this is being driven by national and international forces and decisions at the corporate level. So what we can control here in the county, we're doing everything we can, from pushing forward, not just with connecting these workers to great opportunities regionally and locally, but also continuing to push at the corporate level nationally to see if there's a way to get the plant operations going again at some point.
In one of its last years of operation, GM reports the people who worked at the Baltimore operations made more than $33 million in wages and paid more than $7 million in income tax in 2017. Not only will the closure of the plant affect the workers inside, it will likely hurt nearby businesses like the local Double T Diner.
I would say between 15 and 20%. Yeah. I mean, they were customers, very good customers of ours, so, we're not happy and we're sad. It's just another big company that we're losing in White Marsh, and, it's going to affect the community, and we're upset about it.
A lot has changed over the years since GM's Baltimore operations first opened in December 2000. But County Executive Olszewski remains optimistic.
We've got manufacturing and distribution and logistics happening all over Trade Point Atlantic and eastern Baltimore County. Northern Baltimore County, we have great companies like McCormick and BD. And so those companies are actually looking for, a lot of these companies are still looking for employees.
The beginning of what was a new era in automaking, which began right here in White Marsh, now comes to an end. And 300 white and blue-collar workers are left wondering what a future with or without GM holds for them. Jamie?
When we come back, I'm going to sit down with members of the Retired General Motors Association.
She was a very good friend of mine.
On a night the birds
And
chirp
I
like a
have an
Chevy
hourly
Impala,
guide that's a
we
good
spoke with your friends who built the cars you drove down Chesterfield, Hartford Road, and Callaway Avenue.
When I started working there, I worked putting in seatbelts.
They paid us well, providing you worked hard for them.
It's like each one of these retirees' middle initial is GM.
Got to GM on April 20th, 1965, 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Like starting a Corvair. You don't forget the details that started you on the road to a great life.
I'm going to be 92 in July. I was born 7/27/27, and that's the same forward and backward.
That is great. I love it. Ah, Miss Mary. Push the pedal to the metal in leaving Montgomery Wards for a job in accounting at GM.
I really came to life when I hit personnel.
Where she takes sick calls.
For the people that were incarcerated, or they always had some excuse. And this one guy, as soon as I'd hear his voice, I said, I know your name. You're in Department 28. You got a fever, you'll be in tomorrow.
And some call-outs still stick.
This one lady said, I don't know who you are, but please get my husband home. The wash machine won't shut off. I said, turn the spigot off. She said, oh yeah.
But for Mary, GM was her lifesaver.
Without GM, I wouldn't probably be here today because I had a sick husband with MS, and I was the sole supporter. And I had a little girl, but they were kind as they could be to me.
I'm proud of the way I turned out for a girl that never went to college, and I didn't even graduate from high school. I quit high school, and then I went and took my GED and got my, passed and became a supervisor.
You get the idea. This former beer pourer at Jimmy's Seafood kind of stood up to the men in the plant.
They were more than willing to give you as much responsibility as you wanted.
Before history, they made history.
We had a large body side molding that was glued on. It's the first time it's ever been done in the industry.
Time and time again, stopping at red lights won't slow them down, critiquing the cars in front.
To see if the doors fit to the fenders properly.
A couple weeks ago, there was one that looked really beat up on Costco's parking lot, and the person got in it, and I said, how many miles do you have on your van? He said, 275,000.
Miles and miles of memories. And how did we reach the end of the road?
The decisions we made back in the 70s and 80s when we were driven by the financial people in the corporation rather than the engineers.
A lost opportunity during the gas crisis where Al would spend his lunch period watching competition roll by.
I'd sit outside, eat lunch, and you see the car haulers coming up Burning Highway from the dock. And, it just sees all those cars going by. I'm talking about the foreign cars.
I think we made too many products.
Well, all those opinions have crossed over the Hanover Bridge in the trunk of a Pontiac, as sadness now finds a parking spot.
The toughest part was crossing Burning Highway for the last time.
I got a job after the plant was shut down with the demolition company that tore the plant down. I was weighing the steel out. It was very sad. Very.
It's gone. It's a tough thing to think about. When GM, for me, and I'm sure most people feel the same way, it was family.
What the plant was like when it was building airplanes back during World War II and that kind of stuff. So that's all ingrained in the memory. It's never going to go away, and we'll leave it for other people in Maryland to take advantage of it after we're gone.
After sharing their stories, they will leave in their
Malibu.
Silverado. That's up.
A Hyundai.
1967 Pontiac Le Mans built in Baltimore.
And they'll remember their friends.
Billy Myers.
Jerry Wiesner.
Warren Clopton, Ed Ludlow, two other people that I work with and share an office with.
And it is fitting that the final word spoken from this assembly line comes from a young lady older than a LaSalle.
Jamie, I still have not seen the lot that they knocked the building down. I just cannot go look at it. Where General Motors was. It was like home. I mean, you could feel grouchy and get in there with the people. Life came back.
And what a life it was. And more of it when we come back.
We're done. You can't beat that.
used to have a lot of plants on the East Coast, and pretty much every one of those is gone, except Allison, and that'll be gone.
Thank you for joining us from the Baltimore Museum of Industry, and we hope you enjoyed this drive down memory lane. Yeah, it is the end of an era as the car door slams on a piece of our history, but it's up to each and every one of us to find another highway that'll hopefully lead to new opportunities. And maybe they're just an exit away.